There's a Washington Post article from a few years back that has a list of the government shutdown events over the various years, and I had the folks put it up here on our monitors. So let's take a look at this. Let's take a look at the various government shutdowns. There have been many. There it is, October 1976. It was shut down for 10 days under Gerald Ford. Look at the Democrats had a massive control of the Senate. Mike Mansfield, who was a very liberal leader of the Senate, and they controlled, look at the House they controlled, 291 Democrats. This is after, Nixon resigned, and they had a massive electoral victory, the Democrats. Does anybody remember, those of us who are my age or even younger, the government shut down back in 1976? Anybody remember that? Of course you don't. And they say the major conflict there was because Ford vetoed a funding bill for the Departments of Labor, Health, Education, Welfare, arguing it failed to restrain spending adequately. Republican presidents in the past, before the Bushes became president, would use these occasions to try and control spending. We don't do that anymore. Go ahead, let's scroll down. How was it resolved? Congress overrode Ford's veto, so the spending bills took effect, but it wasn't until over a week later the partial shutdown ended, and we're back at it. Oh, my goodness. Apocalypse now, not. Go ahead. Shutdown number 2, the abortion shutdown, or what we should call it is the pro-life shutdown. Again, 1977, this time Carter's president. The Democrats still control the Senate by a substantial majority, and former Klansman is the Democrat Majority Leader Robert Byrd. And by the way, in order to be the Democrat Majority Leader, that means he had to get the vote of a majority of the Democrats in the Senate, like Ted Kennedy and so forth, and he did. Who controlled the House? Still the massive Democrat numbers, 292 Democrats under Tip O'Neill. So what happened? The House insisted on continuing the ban on using Medicaid dollars to pay for abortions, except in cases where the life of the mother was at stake. We don't even have that debate anymore, do we? No, we just fund abortions, abortions on demand, abortions in the last 3 seconds of the pregnancy. It doesn't matter. Back then, at least we had a moral position, a moral debate on this. The Senate wanted to loosen this to include allowances for abortions in the case of rape or incest, or when the mother's health was in danger. How was it resolved? The Medicaid ban was continued until October 31, and the shutdown ended to give negotiators more time to work out a deal. So that lasted 12 days. America survived. And look at the moral issue that was at stake there. We don't even do that anymore. Go ahead, please. Third shutdown. See what's going on? The battles in 76, 77, and there's more to come. Abortion shutdown number 2, as you see they call it. What happened? Not enough time had lapsed since the temporary measure ending the shutdown passed for the abortion standoff to be resolved, so they passed another temporary bill. But that shutdown was 8 days. So far you have 20 days where the federal government is shut down in late 1977. 20 days. Nothing happened. Go ahead. Shutdown number 4. The abortion shutdown, third time, they call it, 8 days. So that's a total of 28 days. 28 days in 1977, near the end of the year. The second temporary measure ending a shutdown meant to allow more time for negotiation. Didn't last long enough. The House in particular rejected a Senate proposal that would have allowed for Medicaid to pay for abortions by victims of statutory rape. You see, it was the position of the Republicans back then, particularly Henry Hyde, a great congressman from Illinois, very Lincoln-esque as a matter of fact, that pretty much, except in really, really rare cases, the federal government should stay out of the abortion issue. It shouldn't be funding, subsidizing abortions virtually of any kind. That was the official position of the Republican Party that has long been abandoned. So the House rejected a Senate proposal that would have allowed for Medicaid to pay for abortions by victims of statutory rape. Conservatives rejected it as too lax, House liberals as too tough, and so forth. What resolved it? A deal was brokered in which the exception allowing Medicaid to pay for abortions in case where the mother's life is in danger was widened to include abortions resulting from rape or incest, or which are necessary to protect the mother's health, even if her life was not in danger. Next one. Next one, shutdown number 5. Notice the battles that are taking place during the Carter administration, Republicans against Democrats and Democrats against Democrats. The Democrats still have that same massive majority in the Senate and House. So what happened? Congress passed a defense bill including funding for a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. Carter judged that carrier wasteful and vetoed it. He also vetoed a public works appropriations bill because of water projects he considered wasteful. Important. Additionally, spending for HEW now was delayed once again over a dispute concerning funding for abortion. It's now called Health and Human Services. So what resolved it? A new defense bill excluding funding for the carrier was passed, as was a new public works bill excluding the water projects that Carter opposed. The previous year's compromise solution on abortion, in which funding was reserved for cases of rape, incest, and jeopardy to the mother's health, was agreed to again in both houses. Shutdown number 6, 11 days under Jimmy Carter. The Democrats still have a massive hold on the Senate, 58-42, and in the House, 277-158. Now notice, the reporters back then weren't saying to Jimmy Carter, hey, you control the House, you control the Senate, you control the presidency. What's the problem with all these shutdowns? How come there's these shutdowns and these shutdowns? What happened? The House wanted to raise congressional and senior civil service pay by 5.5%, with the Senate opposed. The House also wanted to limit federal abortion spending to cases where the mother's life was in danger, while the Senate wanted to keep funding in cases of rape, incest, and when the mother's health was in serious jeopardy. The dispute was not resolved before a partial shutdown. Let me tell you why. This thing about the mother's health, Reagan signed a law when he was governor of California that had this same language pretty much, that the state would permit abortions in the case of rape, incest, and the health of the mother. Well, what was happening is people were writing doctors repeatedly for abortions on demand. It was the health of the mother, the psychological health of the mother, the pain. She had pain issues, so forth and so on, and Reagan said it was the worst thing he ever did. That's what they're trying to control here. They're not controlling abortion. They're controlling the funding of abortion by federal taxpayers. How was this resolved? The House got its pay increases but had to allow abortion funding in cases of rape and incest, but not whether the mother's health rather than life was in danger. The latter was a slight tightening of the previous year's Medicaid abortion compromise. We can't even stop the funding for Planned Parenthood, which isn't even a part of the government. It is a so-called private entity, which does fundamentally and essentially and primarily abortion. Oh, no, we look at the health of the women and the health of mother. No, they're basically a massive abortion clinic. Shutdown number 7, go. Now we get into it with the Gipper. Shutdown number 7. You wouldn't like Reagan when he's angry. Republicans had a majority in the Senate, and that was because Reagan won this massive landslide. Nobody expected it, and he pulled in the Republicans to control the Senate. Who controlled the House? Still Tip O'Neill by a substantial number, as you can see. So what happened? Reagan promised to veto any spending bill that didn't include at least half of his proposed $8.4 billion in domestic budget cuts. It's always interesting to even hear conservatives and pseudo-conservatives say Reagan didn't do enough to cut government spending. I was there. He tried. He shut down the government, and he did so proudly. He fought the Democrats. He tried to cut spending. The Democrats wouldn't go along with him, and neither would a big percentage of the Republicans. Same problem we have today. The Senate passed a bill that met his specifications, but the House insisted on both greater defense cuts than Reagan wanted and pay raises for itself and for senior-level federal civil servants. Eventually, the House and Senate agreed to and passed a package that fell $2 billion short of the cuts Reagan wanted, so Reagan vetoed it and shut down the government. Why do we do these things anymore today? What resolved it? The House and Senate passed and Reagan signed a bill extending current spending through December 15, giving them time to work out a longer-lasting deal. He gave them a few days to work it out. Shutdown number 8, please. Let them eat shutdown. Washington Post is very clever. All right, a one-day shutdown. Basically no reason. The new fiscal year started and Congress just hadn't passed new spending in time, and so parts of the government were first to shut down and so forth. How was it resolved? Well, the House and Senate passed spending bills late, and Reagan signed them. Next shutdown, please. Number 9, Tip O'Neill takes on a nuclear missile and wins. Shut down for 3 days. House and Senate negotiators wanted to fund a $5.4 billion and $1.2 billion respectively in public works expecting to create jobs. But the Reagan administration threatened to veto any spending bill that did not include jobs money. The House also opposed funding the MX missile program, a major defense priority of Reagan's, which he would eventually get. Notice the Democrats, they don't want a nuclear carrier, they don't want the MX missile, they never wanted SDI, they want to slash today defense spending unless you raise $1 in food stamps, you can't raise $1 for the Marines. What is it about this party that wants to unilaterally disarm? And who does that benefit? The Chinese, the North Koreans, the Iranians, of course Russia. So there's your Russia collusion. The Democrats, the leftists, the progressives, as a matter of ideology, are colluding with the Russians because they're doing things the Russians think are terrific. What resolved it? The House and Senate abandoned their jobs plans but declined to fund the MX missile or the Pershing II missile, which was a medium-range missile while the MX was intercontinental. Reagan got his Pershing II missiles. He put them in Europe, mostly Germany. He was supported by Helmut Kohl, the chancellor. He was supported by the prime minister, Margaret Thatcher. There were massive protests in this country talking about Reagan wanted to go to war, Reagan with a button, Reagan was going to create a nuclear nightmare, and so forth and so on. And what did it do? Reagan had a strategy. Increase defense spending, not only keep up, but surpass what the Soviets have been doing with the modernization of their nuclear arsenal, forward place them in Europe to replace older, decaying nuclear systems. In other words, encircle, without firing a bullet, the Soviet Union, spend what we had to on the military, massively increase economic growth, and destroy that evil regime, which is exactly what he did. They also provided funding for the Legal Services Corporation, which provides legal support for poor Americans. No, it doesn't. The Legal Services Corporation, like so many other things in this country, has been captured by the hard left. And what they do is they sue cities and states. They sue them to promote the left-wing agenda. They represent illegal aliens. They're pushing abortion policies and all the rest. But they represent poor people. It is a left-wing organization. It is notorious. And when Reagan was governor, he had to fight the Legal Services Corporation all the time, and he wanted to get rid of it. Let's see, Reagan had wanted to abolish it and increased foreign aid to Israel above what Reagan wanted. While Reagan criticized these moves, he grudgingly signed the bill following a short shutdown. By the way, notice how that has changed, too, funding for Israel. Who supports funding for Israel? Who supports Israel? Trump. Shutdown number 10 for 3 days. House Democrats passed an amendment adding close to $1 billion in education spending. They also cut foreign aid below what Reagan wanted, adding money for Israel and Egypt, but cutting it substantially for Syria and El Salvador. Now I got it. I was wondering about the prior screen. Reagan never wanted to cut funding to Israel. But the Democrats are very slippery. So it's more like this, which is they wanted to add funding for their favorite countries, and they tied to foreign spending, including with Israel, and that's why Reagan probably said, no, I don't support that. That's my recollection, too. So they also cut foreign aid below what Reagan wanted, adding money for Israel and Egypt, but cutting it substantially for Syria and El Salvador, and cut defense spending by about $11 billion relative to Reagan's request. The dispute wasn't resolved before a short shutdown could occur, so how did it resolve itself? House Democrats agreed to reduce their education spending request to about $100 million. They also funded the XM missile, which they had successfully cut funding for during the last shutdown. However, they kept their foreign aid and defense cuts and got a ban on oil and gas leasing in federal animal refuges. The spending bill also added a ban on using federal employee health insurance to fund abortions, except when the mother's life was in danger, similar to the ban already in place for Medicaid. That wasn't as partisan an issue at the time. It was a win for anti-abortion, that is pro-life. Members of both parties, including Reagan and O'Neill, and a loss for pro-choice Democrats, that is pro-abortion Democrats. Again, you got to ignore the Washington Post bias, that O'Neill was this big pro-life guy. He wasn't. Or Howard Baker was a big pro-abort guy. He was, but not ultra big. All right, next. Shutdown number 11. I'm going through this painstakingly, which I still think is fascinating, to show you. The government can shut down, and all will be well. It'll be just fine. September, October 1984, 2 days. Passage of a spending bill was complicated by the House linking it to a crime-fighting package, which Reagan wanted, and a water projects package, which he opposed, and the Senate's tying it to a civil rights measure, which Reagan also opposed, and would have reversed a Supreme Court ruling weakening civil rights requirements on universities receiving federal funds. Isn't that clever? So Reagan, you see, was against civil rights. They don't explain it anything beyond that. I have no idea what they're talking about, but you can be sure it's BS. Reagan offered to forego his crime bill in exchange for junking the water package and the civil rights provision. But a deal wasn't reached in time to avoid a brief shutdown. What resolved it? A 3-day spending extension was passed and signed so the parties could keep negotiating. Shutdown number 12. 1984. Look at all these shutdowns going on here. Oh my God, they're shutting down the government left and right and left and right and left and... Oh, come on, will you? Let's see. What happened? The 3-day extension wasn't long enough. Congress relented and the water projects were stripped from a spending bill, as was the civil rights measure. They passed a crime package along Reagan's desired lines as well. A compromise was worked out on funding for the Nicaraguan Contras, a.k.a. freedom fighters, where the anti-Sandinista forces could be funded until early the following year. The Sandinistas were communists. You notice how, I'm just reminding you, this is 2013, this report by the Washington Post. So they can't say the communist forces and the pro-Democrat freedom fighter forces, but I'm just straightening it out. Shutdown 13, go. Let's see here. The brief shutdown, 1 day, followed several disagreements between Reagan and the Democrat-controlled House, including over a provision to ban companies from creating subsidiaries to get around labor contracts. You gotta love the Washington Post, don't you? Another requiring that half the goods and labor used in offshore oil rigs be American in origin, and one that would have expanded aid to families with dependent children, which is what welfare was known as at the time. All of those were policies supported by House Democrats and opposed by Reagan and Senate Republicans. What resolved it? House Democrats gave up a number of their demands and secured a promise for a vote on their welfare expansion. In return, passed appropriations necessary to reopen the government. Republicans, meanwhile, offered a concession related to the government sale of Conrail, a then public railway. Number 14. For 1 day. Reagan and congressional Democrats couldn't agree on funding for the Nicaraguan Contra militants, the freedom fighters, in time to avoid a shutdown. Additionally, Democrats pushed for a provision reinstating the Fairness Doctrine, against talk radio, among others, which required that broadcasters give equal airing to both sides in political disputes, in which the FEC had recently stopped enforcing at the time. Basically, the purpose of the Fairness Doctrine was for the federal government to continue to control speech. When you look at every one of these and you read through the propaganda of the Washington Post, you can see that Reagan was really a principled conservative, and he fought and fought and fought the left. He fought them for certain military projects we needed. He fought them to try and cut some of their spending. He fought them to cut some of their phony civil rights measures, which are typically left-wing redistribution measures or group think-type policies and so forth. What resolved it? Democrats yielded on the Fairness Doctrine. They've never yielded on the Fairness Doctrine. And a deal was worked out wherein non-lethal aid was provided to the freedom fighters known as the Contras. Shutdown number 15. George H.W. Bush. You can see the Democrats controlled the Senate, and the detestable George Mitchell was the majority leader, and they controlled the House. Bush refused to sign any continuing resolution into law unless it was paired with a deficit reduction plan, and backed up the pledge by vetoing one that made it to his desk. The House failed to override his veto, and the conflict was not resolved before a shutdown. So what resolved it? The House and Senate adopted a joint budget resolution that provided an outline for reducing the deficit, and Bush then signed a continuing resolution they sent amending the shutdown. Let's stop there. Whatever happened to that outline? It disappeared. It was written in invisible ink. It's a joke. They have an outline for reducing the deficit. It's like they have an outline for building a wall. And we keep giving them what they want, and we keep getting their outlines. All right, shutdown number 16. Now, I want you to see that the shutdown prior to this was 1990, so it wasn't for another 5 years that there was a shutdown, and this time for 5 days under Bill Clinton. The Republicans held the Senate, and now you had the Newt Gingrich House of Representatives. And thanks to Gingrich, not so much Bob Dole, some progress was made. Under Clinton, the GOP-run Congress sent Clinton a continuing resolution that would have raised Medicare premiums. In other words, you got to reform Medicare or it's going to eviscerate itself. It's going to shut down. Committed the president to balance the budget within 7 years and curtail environmental regulations, among other provisions. He vetoed it, triggering a shutdown. But look at the agenda being pushed. Do you hear this agenda coming from McConnell today or Paul Ryan today? You don't hear anything. What resolved it? The shutdown was ended when Clinton, Gingrich, and Dole reached an agreement to fund the government at 75% levels for 4 weeks while budget negotiations continued. Now think about that. They got a 25% cut in government spending for 4 weeks. I don't believe that's ever happened since. That is a deal that Gingrich cut. Clinton also agreed to the 7-year balanced budget timeline. Workers furloughed during the shutdown were given back pay. They're always given back pay. Shutdown 17, go. Lasted 3 weeks. 3 weeks. 1996. Bill Clinton, President of the United States. Republican leaders demanded the White House propose a 7-year budget plan that balanced when using the CBO's economic forecast rather than the OMB's, which were more optimistic because Clinton controlled the OMB. The plan Clinton proposed still produced a $115 billion deficit in 7 years, according to the CBO numbers, even as the OMB estimated would balance the budget by then. The dispute was not resolved before this continuing resolution agreed to a month earlier. What resolved the Republicans caved, of course, and passed legislation to keep the government open. Clinton, in turn, submitted a budget plan that the CBO said balanced the budget within 7 years. Now, let's stop there. I don't see how the Republicans caved, just to be accurate, when Clinton agreed to the CBO numbers, which is what the Republicans wanted, as opposed to the OMB numbers. But even more importantly, the Republicans forced a government shutdown for 3 weeks to address the debt, to insist that the President of the United States, because the Congress controls the power of the purse, they said, we are shutting the purse until we, the 2 branches of government that are involved in the spending side, until we get from you a commitment to cut spending. And keep in mind, the Democrats always say, look at Clinton, he had a balanced budget. We never had a balanced budget, but this is what caused Clinton to limit his spending. Gingrich, quite frankly, and the Republican Congress. This is way back in the first month of 1996. They shut it for 3 weeks. The Republicans today don't even talk about the debt. They don't even talk about the debt. I want you to look at something else here. 1996. The government was shut down one other time, the 18th time, since the Budget Act of 1974. That's the date from which people counted, the Budget Act of 1974. It was shut down in 2013. Do you remember that shutdown in 2013? And it was shut down, I'm doing this off the top of my head, for 15 days. Do you remember why? It was a senator who went to the floor of the United States Senate and said, I'm blocking spending until we repeal Obamacare. Do you remember who that senator was? Ted Cruz. He was brutally attacked, not just by the Democrats, not just by the Democrats' Praetorian Guard media. He was brutally attacked by the editorial pages of the Wall Street Journal. He was brutally attacked by many commentators, so-called conservatives on Fox News. He was mocked. You had McConnell and his thugs leaking without attribution to left-wing news outlets like the New York Times, the Washington Post, and Politico, trashing Cruz. You actually had senators on record trashing Cruz. Whoa, they shut down the government for 15 days. And they kept saying, well, we can't get what we want anyway because Obama is still president. You got to wait for the Republicans to control the Congress and control the presidency, and on and on and on. But that was the 18th time the government shut down for 15 days. What happened to the economy? Did it tank? No. Were we attacked by the Russians? No. Did Social Security, did the checks go out? Yes. What happened? Well, Cruz lost. And now are you enjoying your Obamacare insurance and the massive spending that took place? The Republicans, more than even the Democrats, led the way trashing a conservative senator who stood up, like Mr. Smith who goes to Washington, to try and stop this endless cycle of what's taking place in this country. It's really quite appalling. Now, on tomorrow's program, I'm going to look a little bit more deeply into this whole issue of the debt, because, frankly, if I don't do it, nobody else will do it.